Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, April the 29th, 2024. Today, Venus moves into Taurus, and in this video, I want to look at what it means for Venus to be in Taurus. And I just want to look at some charts of people who have this placement. It is all rather generic, isn't it? Venus in Taurus. I mean, so many different people have Venus in Taurus with completely different outlooks, completely different personalities, and one wonders whether it really is possible to generalize Venus in Taurus. And I think that is a problem, considering something like Venus in Taurus, but I'm going to give it a go. And I suppose this is a reminder that there are two ways of looking at what it means for a planet to be in a sign. One way you could call it the rational way, and the other way is the empirical way. I think there was that psychologist and philosopher William James. He wrote a book about the difference between a rational and an empirical approach. The rational approach is perhaps not quite how we see rational right now in 2024. Rational was about how we use our intelligence to work out what something means. We don't have to use and look at outside data, so we can work out rationally what it should mean for Venus to be in Taurus, and we don't have to worry too much about external information. Of course, the empirical approach would be to look at lots of charts of people with Venus in Taurus and then to work out from them what it means for Venus in Taurus, for Venus to be in Taurus. And that's kind of the approach I'm going to take today, by just seeing if we can actually see any commonalities between, I don't know, Henry Kissinger, Melania Trump, Sid Vicious, Princess Diana. You could throw in Adolf Hitler, whatever you like. Is there any commonalities there at all? Or does it depend completely on the personality? And in that case, well, is there any point in looking at planets in signs? Maybe each of us are individual, and there's really no point in considering planets in signs. But before I look at Venus in Taurus, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, April the 29th, 2024. So here is the chart for today, set for New York at noon. Top right, you can see some people with Venus in Taurus. They include Melania Trump, Sid Vicious, formerly of the Sex Pistols. I think he died of a heroin overdose in 1979. Henry Kissinger, and of course, Princess Diana. The moon today is going to be in Capricorn. The moon is in Capricorn all day long. Doesn't matter what your time zone is. And when we think of moon in Capricorn, we think of someone being quite materialistic. And it's a time when material details are important, but not necessarily in a negative way. I know that moon in Capricorn has a certain problematic reputation. I mean, the moon, okay, it doesn't work too well in Capricorn. After all, the moon rules Cancer, therefore it's in its detriment in Capricorn. So it may be difficult to express our feelings in a natural, organic way, maybe because we're just a little too concerned about material details, a bit too concerned about our own security and our own selfish needs. But that is something that really does have to be considered. We just can't forget that. And the moon in Capricorn is kind of making a trine to the sun in Taurus. Now, it doesn't really matter if this trine between moon in Capricorn, sun in Taurus is exact, because we can really say they're both in earth signs. So there's a natural affinity with moon in Capricorn and sun in Taurus. It's a harmonious relationship. Yeah, even if the trine, the 120-degree aspect, isn't exact, we know how to behave. And with the moon in Capricorn and the sun in Taurus, it's a day when we really can focus on the material details. And I don't think we need to worry too much about being selfish. I think in some respects it's expected, provided we don't take things too far. We do have to consider our own financial and material best interests, especially as the moon is making a sextile aspect to Saturn. And with that moon sextile Saturn, that is about creating security and stability for ourselves, and that is really nothing to be ashamed of. Having said all that, there are things that might threaten the foundations of our existence. I mean that in a very general collective sense, nothing personal, because there is this conjunction between Mars and Neptune. And I've already talked about this Mars-Neptune conjunction when I was talking about the astrology for the weekend. And this conjunction between Mars and Neptune is on the fixed star Skeet. And Skeet is often associated with shipwrecks and disasters at sea. And today in particular, we have to be so careful around water. It is not a day for trivial boat trips. If you don't have to be on boats or around water, then that's good, because where there's water, there's a problem. And we have to be very careful with plumbing. Anything connected with water can be a problem. Though in general, Mars conjunct Skeet can indicate disasters, putting one's energy into the wrong things with disastrous results. And we have to therefore really play it safe. And also we have to watch out for deception. Mars is about how people assert themselves, and Neptune gives an idea about how that assertion might manifest, and it's very deceptive. It's not approaching things head on. It's kind of taking a sideways approach, perhaps not always telling the truth or saying what needs to be said to get one's way short term. And of course that Mars-Neptune conjunction is in Pisces, and Pisces can be as a sign quite slippery. So that Mars-Neptune conjunction, we have to be very careful about it. It's not just going to disappear today, it's going to be around tomorrow. And deception could be something that we really have to be concerned about. And it may be us doing the deceiving. Maybe we might be deceiving ourselves. Maybe we might take the view that we want to get something done and a few white lies might be just the trick. But I think if we start telling lies with Mars conjunct Neptune, it could come back to get us. So try to keep things simple and above board. I suppose if there's any way of using the Mars-Neptune conjunction in a constructive way, I suppose one can think of one's spirituality, focusing on something beyond oneself. That's what one should be perhaps putting one's energy into. And at the same time as Mars makes a conjunction to Neptune, Venus is moving into Taurus. Venus moves into Taurus London time at 12:31. In other words, around lunchtime. So 12:31 would be 7:31 in the morning in New York. It would be, what would that be? 4:31 in the morning in New York, in California, Oregon, Washington State, British Columbia. So if you're in the Americas, Venus moves into Taurus quite early in the morning. If you're in Europe, Venus moves into Taurus around lunchtime. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then Venus really won't move into Taurus until the very end of the day. And Venus moving into Taurus is a big change, because we've had Venus moving through Aries for a long time, and Venus moving through Aries in some respects isn't great, because we could say that Venus is in its detriment in Aries, though Venus, when it moves into Taurus, is in its own sign. So all of a sudden Venus becomes very strong, and all the attributes of Venus start to move into focus. So perhaps our aesthetic judgment is going to improve with Venus when Venus moves into Taurus. It's perhaps also going to be easier to get on with people. We won't feel that we have to be so assertive, and other people may have to take the same view, that they don't have to throw their weight around so much, that they can focus not on just getting attention, getting results, but they can focus on building up relationships. There is something slower about Venus in Taurus compared with Venus in Aries. I mean, if there's a downside to Venus in Taurus, it could be over expenditure. Venus in Taurus, all things being equal, enjoys the good things in life, whether that's just clothes, just things, material things, or it could be food, entertainment, going to concerts, theatres. That's all Venus in Taurus, and what things look like is very important to Venus in Taurus. And so while Venus is moving through Taurus, appearances may be more important than they were when Venus is in Aries. So yeah, perhaps you have to put more effort into what one looks like. Maybe I have to put more effort into it, Venus in Taurus. So that's the broad idea about Venus in Taurus, but I will be going into Venus in Taurus in greater detail at the end of this video when I look at various people who have this placement. From a heliocentric perspective, let's look at what's happening today. This is the heliocentric chart. Mars and Pluto are in a semi-sextile aspect. So Mars is about to go into Aries from a geocentric perspective. From a heliocentric perspective, Mars is just moving into Pisces. I don't really worry too much about what the signs mean from a heliocentric perspective. So with Mars semi-sextile Pluto, that is the struggle to be in control. Power is going to be very important today, and perhaps tomorrow as well. And it's going to be very important to assert oneself. Maybe it's not us doing the asserting, but it's these outside forces. Yeah, they really want to be in control, and they're going to use whatever means are at their disposal. Though one way of trying to be in control is to use nice words. And from a heliocentric view, look at Mercury and Venus. Mercury and Venus are trine. It's always interesting to consider a heliocentric trine like that, because of course from a geocentric perspective, Mercury and Venus will never be in trine. It's impossible for Mercury and Venus to be in trine. But heliocentrically, with the Sun at the center of the solar system, you can get a Mercury-Venus trine, and that's what we've got. And with a Mercury-Venus trine, it's a time when we really can communicate very well, and organizations can communicate very well. It's all in the message. But with Mars also making a semi-sextile to Pluto, that message could be quite manipulative, trying to get its way through clever words, through sweet talking. That is a negative view of Mercury trine Venus. But Mercury trine Venus can also be quite artistic, quite talented, and it may be a good opportunity to tell the world about what we can do and about our abilities. I think people are going to listen with this Mercury trine Venus, and we need to address ourselves, because it's a heliocentric chart representing a more sort of global collective picture. That's who we should be addressing ourselves to, maybe not just to people on a one-to-one level. Though overall, I mean, I'm not saying that the heliocentric picture is especially exciting or especially dramatic. It's quite gentle, even though that Mars semi-sextile Pluto sounds a bit difficult, but it's a semi-sextile, it's a minor aspect. Mercury trine Venus, we can use that in a gentle way if we so wish. So if there's something we want to say, and we want to be pleasant with our words, but also exciting. I mean, I think there is a certain sense of excitement with Mercury trine Venus, not least because it's an aspect we don't really meet very often from a geocentric perspective. We never meet a Mercury trine Venus. So try to tune into what that might mean to have a Mercury trine Venus from a heliocentric view. And that's it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecast for today, which is Monday, April the 29th, 2024, from the perspective of the 12 signs. Aries. I think, Aries, that it could actually be a very useful day, and you are helped by the fact that the moon is making a square to Mercury. Now, that might not sound too good, because we think of squares as being problematic. When you think of moon square Mercury, there is perhaps a struggle to communicate. Moon and Mercury are the two communication planets. Moon is more about emotional communication. Mercury is about sort of mental communication, cognitive communication, when we say what's on our mind. And so when the moon and Mercury are square, there could be this struggle to communicate in a way that is effective and doesn't upset people. Yet the moon is in Capricorn, which is in a high-profile sector of your chart, and Mercury is in Aries. It's in your sign, and it's conjunct the North Node. And so because of that interaction between Aries and Capricorn, I think in this case, the moon square Mercury is actually going to enable you to communicate very effectively, especially if the subject of your communication is very definite. For example, about something you want, something that has got material limits, like I want this, you owe me money, for example. Are you going to give me a job? And I think that you'll be helped by the fact that from a heliocentric perspective, Mercury is trine Venus. And so Mercury trine Venus is a time, as I've just discussed, when communications are going to be quite sort of free-flowing. And so I do think that moon square Mercury is going to help you express yourself, especially in a high-profile environment like work, or if you're looking for something, maybe you're looking for a job, that moon square Mercury could be very, very useful. It's almost like you're able to take advantage of the dynamic tension between moon square Mercury. If it was moon trine Mercury, perhaps the words would just come out too easily, and the other person listening to them would just say, fine, this is what you're saying, who cares? But because there's a square, it's dynamic. Someone is forced to listen. And if someone is forced to listen, that means that you can have an impact. Now, you may feel at this stage that I'm skirting around the important issue. And of course, the important issue for today is Mars conjunct Neptune. Mars rules Aries. Mars is conjunct Neptune on the fixed star Skeet. Now, this conjunction between Mars and Neptune does indicate that in some departments of your life, you do have to be cautious. It's not a day for taking risks. And it's not a day for being devious in most cases. I think if you are devious and if you try to hide things, I don't think it's going to work. You're going to feel that it's just unnatural and it's not you, and things could go wrong. I mean, it's just it might be tempting, though, Aries. You might just feel that there's something you don't want to reveal, that you don't think people are going to be interested. If people knew what you were planning, they wouldn't take kindly to it. But I wouldn't advise that, unless, of course, you are that small minority of Arians who are devious, who like to do things behind everyone's back. Very few Arians are like that. I mean, Aries is a very direct and to the point sign. But I suppose there must be a few Arians who are very comfortable with that approach, in which case I suppose it can be effective, at least in the short term. But even if it can be effective, you do have to think about the moral dimension. And with Mars conjunct Neptune, if you really were to go with the energy of Mars conjunct Neptune and to embrace it, and if it were to inform your behavior, then you may be doing something that is wrong. Okay, maybe you're a private detective, in which case that's okay. I suppose from a positive perspective, though, Mars conjunct Neptune may be quite spiritual. So from a purely spiritual perspective, we can say Mars is you, Mars in Pisces, conjunct Neptune, may give you access to high-level cosmic forces which you've been feeling them recently, and now you suddenly are really in tune with them, and you can start to make sense of them. They very much feel part of you, and that would be fine. Though don't necessarily act on them. What you mustn't do, Aries, is act on vague feelings, which I think you could do with Mars conjunct Neptune, but I do think that would be unnecessary. Finally, I should say something about relationships, and from an Aries perspective, Venus is the ruler of Libra, your opposite sign, and Venus is changing sign from Aries to Taurus. Now, there may be someone who you have recently had quite a lot of influence over. But with Venus moving out of Aries into Taurus, they are becoming stronger. And perhaps you are losing some of your influence. So don't underestimate people. Perhaps someone had been weak in the past, had been very happy to listen to what you say and to follow your lead. Well, that does seem to be changing, and it's probably a good thing. And perhaps you should give someone close to you more independence, because if you don't give them independence, then they're going to demand their independence. So with Venus moving into Taurus, in terms of relationships, a bit of respect on your part might be a good idea, and you do have to respect people's need to be free, I suppose within limits. You don't want someone to be so free that they damage themselves or damage anyone else, but it is something you need to bear in mind. Some Aries do like to be in control, but there are going to be clear limits to your control. Taurus. Well, the big news today is that Venus is moving into your sign. Yeah, Venus moves into Taurus. Quite when Venus moves into Taurus rather depends on your time zone, but from the perspective of Western Europe, Venus moves into Eurus around lunchtime. If you're in the Americas, it's going to be early in the morning. Australia and New Zealand, it's going to be fairly late in the evening. But this Venus moving into Taurus, it's not just a one-day wonder. Venus will be in Taurus, I suppose, for the next month or so, next 4 weeks, or something like that. And as Venus is your ruler, this immediately makes you a lot stronger. You're able to act in a clearer, more organic way, and you're not going to get the balance wrong. I think that was perhaps a problem when Venus was in Aries. You didn't really know always how to assert yourself, how to get the balance right between, for example, talking and listening, acting and reacting. That was perhaps a bit of a problem. But now that Venus has moved into Taurus, you are very grounded. You have a clearer sense of what you're supposed to be doing, and your aesthetic judgment is a lot better. I know I've said that for all signs, with Venus moving into Taurus, it's going to be easier to make good judgments about what is beautiful, what is ugly, what looks good, and so on. But for you, Taurus, it's very specific. You are almost an arbiter of good taste, or you can be, and that is certainly to be welcomed. Though in some cases, Venus in Taurus can be rather indulgent. So over the next 4 weeks or so, I should have told you when Venus is leaving Taurus. I should have worked that out beforehand. Venus is in Taurus until the 23rd of May. So that is, it's not quite 4 weeks. So, but between now and the 23rd of May, you could be a little overindulgent. And that could have implications in terms of money, spending money on things that just aren't necessary. And I think that urge to spend money may be particularly strong now as Venus makes the sign change. It might just feel that you've had Venus in Aries. That was a bit of a problem. You weren't on best form, but now Venus is in Taurus. You might want to celebrate just by spending hundreds, even thousands of dollars on things that look nice. But I think you need to resist that temptation, though in some cases Taurans have been in a situation where their taste has not been very good, and perhaps if they've been sensible, they've been putting some essential purchases on hold. So if there's something you have to buy that's going to be bought anyway, especially if it's something where looks are important, and I must emphasize, if you have to buy, if you were going to buy anyway, well, then maybe now with Venus in Taurus, maybe the time to buy it, provided you don't go over the top and bankrupt yourself buying it. So that is another way of looking at Venus in Taurus. Venus in Taurus is also going to just be good for the way you look. The ascendant is about the way we look. If you're looking at these 12 sign readings from a perspective of the ascendant, and I know many of you are, then Venus moving into your first house, into the sign of your ascendant, is just going to be good for the way you look. You'll be able to project yourself in an attractive but calming kind of way, and it's going to be a great time to be with people and to show yourself in the best possible light. And at the same time as all this, the moon is moving through Capricorn, which is an earth sign. And so with the moon moving through Capricorn, remember Taurus is an earth sign. I think you're going to be feeling comfortable. Moon is in Capricorn, Sun is in Taurus, Venus is in Taurus. Just things are going your way. And if you want to consider your own financial and material best interests, I think it's okay. I think you'll be able to do it in such a way that it doesn't cause upset. Just take it slowly. And if you are feeling financially a bit selfish, you want to really push your own financial interests to the exclusion of other people's, yeah, maybe you can do it, but you've just got to be subtle. And subtlety is often a very big lesson for Taurans. Taurans, if they want to be socially effective, don't be subtle. Yes, there is always a temptation, if you're a Taurus, to be blunt, but I wouldn't recommend that today. As far as relationships are concerned, we can't ignore the fact that Mars is making a conjunction to Neptune. And Mars is ruler of Scorpio, which is your opposite sign. So with Mars conjunct Neptune, there may be certain people out there who can't necessarily be trusted. Maybe they're up to no good. Maybe they're perfectly nice people, but because they're confused and they don't really know what they're doing, their overall effect may be quite destructive. So people need to be treated with a certain amount of caution, especially from a perspective of one-to-one relationships. When you're dealing with someone one-to-one, when that one person is telling you stuff, is suggesting things, is talking about what they want to do, always consider the possibility that they are at best confused, at worst devious. And don't trust people today. And don't take what they say at face value. And that can be an issue for certain Taurans. Taurans like to keep things simple. And if someone says something, you can be a little bit too trusting. And you take what they say at face value, but I don't think you can take what people say at face value. And so if anyone is acting in a weird way, you don't know what they're doing, you're concerned about whether they're telling the truth, trust your instincts and do things your way and do things what feels right to you. And if you find yourself in a situation where someone is trying to persuade you to do something and you don't feel 100% comfortable about it, then don't do it, because I think you might be seeing the malefic energy of Mars conjunct Neptune at work. Gemini, you are at a certain crossroads here. You're not quite sure how to deal with the world and its issues. Should you hold back, or should you really show everyone what you can do and be open about your feelings? I would have said that in many cases it might be best to hold back. Yeah, I understand that you do have something important to say. Well, I suppose every Gemini has always got something important to say. But if you were to say what's on your mind today, I'm just not convinced it would go down very well. Possibly because you haven't thought it through. And that does create a certain amount of danger. So just because you feel strongly about something doesn't mean that you should necessarily communicate it. And instead, Gemini, it might be best if you ask yourself what is real and what is plain fantasy. Because you do have some ideas about your overall direction in life. I mean, Geminis, I suppose, they always have ideas about their overall direction in life. They're always thinking, they're always trying to sort of reinvent themselves in a sort of intellectual way. But, today with this conjunction between Mars and Neptune in Pisces, in a fairly high-profile sector of your chart, there is some danger that Geminis start moving in directions which, to be honest, they shouldn't really be moving in. And just remember, I'm a Gemini, so I'm not just singling you out. I'm talking about myself as well. And yes, for myself, so many times I'm absolutely sure a particular direction is the right direction to be moving in, and it turns out to be a complete disaster. Or maybe I'm just projecting. But yes, with Mars conjunct Neptune in Pisces, do be careful about new direction. So if you have been recently getting involved in something new and you've been planning for the future, reconsider it. Consider the possibility that you're actually making a mistake. Now, I'm not saying you are making a mistake, and it may just be the case that there are certain details that you haven't fully understood. And in that case, I think that today you are in a very good position to actually start to understand what could go wrong. And I think you will actually be helped by the fact that the moon is in Capricorn. Now, the moon in Capricorn is an energy that is completely at odds with Gemini. I mean, Gemini is mutable air. Capricorn is cardinal earth. But I think it's a time when you actually need to be exposed to this energy, which is at completely odds to the way you are, because that moon in Capricorn, which is about looking after yourself, focusing on the important material concerns that maybe in the past you've ignored. It's annoying, it's boring, but it's protective. At least it's protective today. And I think that moon in Capricorn, if you really get into it and you make a special effort to be self-interested and focused on the material details, that moon in Capricorn will start to tell you what might go wrong if you keep going perhaps in the direction that you've been planning. And I think part of the problem is that if you are very ambitious today, and if you really want to move in any particular direction, I actually think you're going to cover a lot of ground very quickly. And that might make you in the short term feel that, yeah, you're doing the right thing. But just because something is easy, just because you're making fast progress, does not necessarily mean that things are going well. That might be all about the deception of Mars conjunct Neptune. There is this sense that, yes, things are going well. You can just keep going. But you have to open your eyes and look at what's going on around you. Maybe the metaphorical vehicle that you're traveling in is slowly but surely moving into mud, and if you keep going, you might get stuck. And fortunately, Moon is in Capricorn, and I think that can bring you down to earth. And you might also benefit from other people's advice. There might be people who realize what's true and what's not, and they might be able to just hold you back at the last moment. So if someone is telling you that you're doing something wrong, then I would really suggest that you listen to them, because they might save you a lot of trouble. Though, Gemini, I must emphasize that this is a reading for one day. And so I don't want to over dramatize it. And when I talk about you going in the wrong direction, it might be about something relatively trivial, and the consequences of going in the wrong direction, even if everything goes wrong, may be very negative. Sorry, not negative, maybe very minor. And so, Gemini, don't get too upset about what I'm saying. I'm just suggesting that you need to be a little bit cautious, and that you need to think before you act, and really consider the material realities of what you're planning on doing. Because when you actually look at those realities, you may realize that it's not such a good idea. Cancer. The moon is right in the middle of the sign Capricorn. And from a Cancerian perspective, of course, Capricorn is your opposite sign, connected with relationships. And so it may be a day when there are certain people that have to be dealt with, like it or not. And you have to behave in a way that is appropriate. One problem about today is that the moon is square Mercury. So when you've got moon square Mercury, remembering moon is your ruler, when moon is square Mercury, that may indicate angry words or saying things which cause upset, or it may be just about the way you're thinking. There just are certain things going on around you which you're not entirely comfortable about, and you're just irritated. And if you don't say anything, you're going to get more irritated. But if you do say something, then that might just cause further problems. So you have to get the balance right. I think it's important to say something if you think that something is wrong, but at the same time, you need to choose the right words, because the wrong words could just cause a lot of trouble and make you even more irritated. So do consider that. Also consider the possibility that there may be some constructive criticism coming your way. So if you're doing something, it's almost right, but it's not quite right, don't be afraid of listening to what other people say. Some Cancerians do not like getting advice. They can get very touchy, even offended when people give them well-meaning advice. But don't fall into that trap. Yeah, sure, you might know what you're doing, but there's no harm in listening to another person. You don't have to take their advice You could just listen. You certainly should not be offended by it. So that's one aspect of the day, and that's perhaps the negative way of looking. The negative side of things. But there are some positives. The moon is in Capricorn, but the sun is in Taurus, and Venus is moving into Taurus as well, and that does mean that there are going to be quite a few relationships which can work really well, and it may be a good day for mixing with people, socializing, expressing yourself in just a natural way without having to be someone you're not. And I think that it's a day when you can find people who can be trusted. That's always an issue for Cancerians. Cancer as a sign puts a great premium on loyalty. That's the most important thing. If someone is loyal, that's really all you require. And so you can find people who are loyal, and people can demonstrate their loyalty today. And it works both ways. You can demonstrate your loyalty to them, and you can be loyal to someone and at the same time not compromise your best interests. I mean, your best interests are important today, after all, because the moon is in Capricorn. Moon is your ruler. Capricorn is a sign which is quite self-interested, but your interests and other people's interests can be the same. And so loyalty is something that can be mutually supportive. And so don't ignore other people. Of course, make your choices. Not everyone is loyal. Not everyone can be trusted. After all, Mars is conjunct Neptune today. That affects all of us, regardless of our sign. And with Mars conjunct Neptune conjunct Skeet, yeah, there are people out there who cannot be trusted at all. But you're a Cancerian. You're sensitive. I think you'll know who these people are, and I think you'll be able to find people who really can be trusted, who will be worthy of your loyalty, and they will show you loyalty back in return. And one final thing is that the moon is sextile Saturn, and moon, your ruler, sextile Saturn, which is ruler of the 7th house, your opposite sign, 7th house connected with relationships. So that moon sextile Saturn further emphasizes the point that the right relationships are actually there for you. And it's a day when you can really strengthen certain relationships and perhaps find new relationships, but relationships which are based on firm ground. Leo, Venus is moving into Taurus, and I think that is good news. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's good news. Reason being that from a Leo perspective, Taurus is a high-profile sign. It is often connected with career and business and how we are progressing through the world. And with Venus moving through Taurus, you can be very effective. So over the next few weeks in your work, or if you're in any high-profile situation, you can really project yourself extremely well, and you will know how to come across, and you'll know how to communicate. And it's not about having to say a lot, it's just about your presence, and also, I suppose, the way you look. I suppose, appearances shouldn't matter, but with Venus moving into Taurus, it is, how shall I put it? It's the looking in the mirror configuration. The mirror is important. Seeing what you look like. And I know that the stereotypical Leo has a certain reputation for being vain. And if you do have a vain streak, and I'm not saying you do have a vain streak, by the way. I mean, all of us have vanity at some level. But I think your vain streak might be coming out a bit with Venus moving into Taurus. I hope you're not offended by that. But there's nothing wrong, as I said, with being a little bit vain. And the way you come across, the way you look in the mirror, is going to be more important than usual. And it will help you to project yourself in an effective way. And that's what matters, isn't it? So if you do need to project yourself in an effective way, I think you can do it. And that's why I think that Venus moving into Taurus is going to be very good for you from the perspective of career and business and dealing with organizations, dealing with large groups of people. You really will know how to come across. So if that's relevant to you, really take advantage of it. It's not just Venus moving into Taurus, it's not because the Sun is in Taurus and Jupiter's in Taurus, Uranus is in Taurus. So, there are 4 planets in Taurus now. And that allows you, Leo, to really make a good impression. And today, though, don't feel that you have to necessarily say anything. It's all about being you. In fact, if you were to say things and to try to explain yourself, then actually your power might be weakened. In fact, the more you say, the less impact you'll have once you go beyond just those few words that need to be said just to introduce yourself, to create the setting. But once that setting has been created, there's no need for elaborate explanations. And I do think that elaborate explanations could actually backfire. Instead, just be yourself. Make sure everything is in order. Preparations are going to matter today. I don't think these preparations are going to be particularly irksome. I think that it's all about getting the material details right, perhaps the way you are, what you look like, and just how you are presenting yourself. So a bit of preparation could be useful. But overall, I think if you handle the energies correctly, then I think it should be a pretty good day. And with Venus moving into Taurus, it's not just about today. Venus is in Taurus until I think around May the 23rd, something like that. So that Venus in Taurus over the next few weeks is going to really help propel you into the limelight and allow you to do great things and also to get a lot of respect. And I think it's going to be very good for your popularity ratings. Virgo. I just was talking about Leo, and I was telling Leo that Leo needs to be careful not to say too much. And I think I'd probably say the same for you, though in a slightly different way. I think, Virgo, there are certainly things you want to say, and you might maybe have some complaints. There are certain details you picked up on that you feel need to be explained. But right now, I would kind of suggest that you hold back. I think if you try too hard to communicate, even if you're completely in the right, if you absolutely know, even if you absolutely know what you're talking about, I'm unconvinced that it's going to achieve very much. Because, Virgos at their worst can grate. And I just think the things you say might be grating and are not going to help. And instead, Virgo, I think that you should just focus on what you can do. And in this light, it's not just that the moon is making a square to Mercury. That's looking at Mercury from a very sort of negative perspective, moon square Mercury. An alternative way of looking at things is to turn to the heliocentric chart. And in the heliocentric chart, we see that Mercury is trine Venus. So Mercury is your ruler. It's making this heliocentric trine to Venus. Remember, from a heliocentric perspective, we can get a trine between Mercury and Venus, which we cannot get from a geocentric perspective. And with this trine between Mercury and Venus, you can really understand the world. It is about communication, but unspoken communication. It's about understanding the world and understanding what creates harmony and what doesn't create harmony, and a sense of how best to progress in the particular environment we're living in. And that is the important point, because the environment we're in dictates how we behave, and it also dictates what is going to be successful. So an action taking place 10 years ago could be incredibly successful. The same action now is probably going to be fairly meaningless. It all depends on that external environment. And at the moment, Virgo, I think you have a really good understanding of that. And I think you're going to be helped also by the fact that Venus moves into Taurus. Venus is moving into Taurus today, and Taurus is an earth sign, and it's at a time when the moon is in Capricorn, again, earth sign. And Virgo, that's an earth sign. You are an earth sign. And so with the moon in Capricorn and the Venus moving into Taurus, things are working in your favor, provided you don't analyze the situation too much. Over-analysis could be quite dangerous today. It could spoil the magic. But if you just go with the flow and actually go with the material flow, understanding, well, from a financial point of view, where the money is flowing, if money is important to you. But you also, I think, understand how money can be made and how money can be kept, and perhaps how money can be saved. And I think you do have a good understanding of all that. It's an intuitive understanding. Okay, you may have done a bit of research, but it feels right, your understanding. And so from a financial perspective, with Venus moving into Taurus, and now with the moon in Capricorn as well, you have a good understanding of your own self-interests and how your own self-interests interact with the world that you're living in. The world in 2024, in May 2024, sorry, April, it's April 2024, it's still not May yet. But you understand the demands of the world you're living in. And I think that is going to allow you to be pretty effective and to put yourself in a position where you can go a long way to giving yourself perhaps financial security and maybe also extra income sources. And that's something you need to consider. I know that sounds optimistic, and I know that with astrology readings, there's always pressure to tell people nice things, to say, oh, you're going to make money today. And I know that in most days we don't make money. So I'm not telling you that anything's going to fall on a silver plate for you. I'm just saying that with Venus in Taurus and the moon in Capricorn, But Venus, okay, aside from a moon in Capricorn, Venus does stay in Taurus until May the 23rd. There just could be new ways of making money. Just look out for them, and be a little bit imaginative. I mean, not too imaginative, because remember that today Mars is conjunct Neptune. That is actually quite a deceptive influence. So you've got to keep it real, and don't listen too much to other people, because that Mars conjunct Neptune is in Pisces, which is your opposite sign. And so Mars conjunct Neptune can actually represent people who are up to no good. Maybe deliberately, maybe accidentally. I mean, they may just through their own misunderstanding and self-delusion spread that self-delusion to everything they touch. So just because someone deceives you doesn't mean that they mean to deceive you. They may genuinely think that that's particularly the case. So that's the only rider. Keep it real, and don't listen too hard to anyone else, because you're the one who needs to be making the decisions. And if you trust another person with Mars conjunct Neptune, you could be asking for trouble. Libra. Venus is the ruler of Libra, and Venus is moving into Taurus. And this is quite a mixed thing, because Venus being your ruler and moving into Taurus, that's good, because Venus does work very well in Taurus. Venus, after all, rules Taurus. So in a general sense, Libra, that means that you're going to be in a strong position. But from a Libran perspective, Taurus is a somewhat difficult sign. It's quite introspective. It's quite focused on the darker side of life. It's from a Libran perspective, Taurus can be about legacies, wills, joint finances. In extreme cases, it can be associated with death and matters of succession. And with Venus moving into Taurus, you are taking the world more seriously, and it doesn't seem to be quite so much fun, but at the same time you are being strengthened by it. So by being more serious, by being ready to consider matters of life and death, I mean, okay, I don't want to exaggerate, but those crucial matters about existence, the struggle for existence, by considering these matters, which are matters which very often you don't really want to bother with because they're just too complicated, and many Librans like to keep things at a surface level. But by going under the surface with Venus moving into Taurus, that's where the gold lies. And you're going to be able to understand things which are just going to make things so much easier once you understand them. But to understand them, you have to perhaps dive deep. And you must be ready to do that. And it's going to strengthen you. Because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be starting to understand the foundations of who you are and the foundations of your power. So that is terribly important. And the fact that, today also the moon is in Capricorn, and from a Libran perspective, moon in Capricorn is a very grounded, fairly introspective sign. So with Venus moving into Taurus, moon moving through Capricorn, it is a time to go below the surface and, yes, to consider things that might go wrong, but just to be aware of them. And the more aware you are of the darker side of life, of perhaps the darkness of human nature, the more aware you are of all that, the stronger you will become. And while this is going on, Mars is making a conjunction to Neptune. Now, Mars rules Aries, and of course Aries is your opposite sign, and Mars may represent another person. So if you've got Mars conjunct Neptune, and it's also conjunct this rather difficult fixed star Skeet associated with disasters, shipping disasters, accidents, and so on, be careful about how much you trust other people. Other people may not be reliable, and they could be very disruptive. They could, for example, disrupt your routine. They could be quite draining, but draining in a way that you can't immediately understand. They're just draining. You're with them and you just feel just a little bit exhausted. And so, Libra, I would suggest when dealing with people, even if you know them very well, that you do keep a bit of distance, and you don't necessarily listen too hard to what they say, and you certainly don't get involved in other people's power games. That is just not a good idea. And yeah, do watch out for deception. Mars conjunct Neptune. People might mean well, but they could still have a really disastrous impact if you give them the chance. And I suppose Librans do like to give people another chance. But I think you need to resist that, because, with Venus moving into Taurus right now, I think you should have a really good understanding of the other side, the dark side, the things that people don't want to discuss, the things that are hiding. I think you're going to have a good understanding of that, and I think that's going to serve you very well. Scorpio, Mars is conjunct Neptune. Mars is your ruler. And this conjunction between Mars and Neptune, it's been brewing for a few days, so it's not anything that you're entirely unfamiliar with. But still, today it is exact. And this conjunction is on this fixed star Skeet, which is often connected with shipping disasters, accidents, just things going wrong. And with Mars conjunct Neptune, be careful. You may think that you understand things, that you have a good understanding of the way the world is working, and you have a good understanding of yourself and your own psychology. But consider the possibility that you've got something wrong, that you have made a fundamental misunderstanding. I think this is going to be particularly the case if there's something you've recently come across that you feel incredibly certain about. You feel really sure that it's the case, that it can be trusted. And if you're in that kind of situation, maybe your alarm bells should be ringing. Somehow you've got an impression which is just based on false logic. That is possible. And, I must emphasize that this reading for Scorpio, it is all things being equal. And, my job is just to look at things from perhaps the worst possible perspective. Because then, okay, I might be wrong. I might have been too pessimistic. But I think it's better to be too pessimistic than to be too optimistic. So I am erring on the side of caution here. But just do consider that there might be a fundamental misunderstanding. And that if you were to persist in this misunderstanding, then the Scorpio ship could be heading for the rocks. So consider that. And remember, though, that tomorrow Mars moves into Aries. I think it's tomorrow. So Mars moving into Aries is a great thing for Scorpios. Mars, your ruler, is going to be moving into Aries, where it's the sign of its rulership. So that's really good. That is something to be looking forward to. But today Mars is not in Aries. It's in Pisces and it's conjunct Neptune. And you have to be careful. Now, Mars conjunct Neptune does have a fortunate side to it, provided you don't take risks, provided you don't engage in self-deception. Mars conjunct Neptune can be incredibly imaginative. I've been saying this to you on and off while there have been a lot of planets in Pisces. We're seeing fewer and fewer planets in Pisces, and Mars is the last personal planet in Pisces, and it's about to move into Aries. But it has been a time when Scorpios, I think, have been quite imaginative and being very perceptive, and it might have been a good time, for example, for Scorpio artists. And with Mars conjunct Neptune, your imagination could be absolutely great. So allow your imagination free rein, provided that you don't act on this imagination. You can imagine what you like, provided that imagination doesn't push you into doing things which might be ill-advised. So if you're a painter, you'll be able to create something great, or even start the foundations of something great. Or if you're writing, just let the words splash across the paper. Or I suppose if you're typing, just see what your imagination is bringing up, because I think your imagination is going to be really quite amazing at the moment. And at the same time, Neptune is a planet connected with spirituality, and it might be a good day for tuning into sort of high level forces of a collective nature. What is the cosmos telling you? Remember, don't act on what the cosmos is telling you, because you may have got it wrong. Plenty of scope for deception, including spiritual deception, but by not acting on what you're feeling and thinking, just let it wash over you. See how it feels. And maybe in a day or two's time, you'll be able to get a perspective on it. When you look back at what you're perceiving today, perhaps when you look back on it tomorrow or the day after, you'll have a better understanding about whether it was genuine spiritual inspiration or whether it was something that was a bit of a delusion. So it's okay to allow yourself to get into that Mars conjunct Neptune, even though it's on skeet. It's okay to get into it, provided it doesn't push you into taking action, at least in the short term, because that action could be unfortunate. But I think, Scorpio, you know how to handle it, and I think if you're sensible and you have a bit of objectivity, I think you'll be fine. Sagittarius, you certainly have something to say today, Sagittarius. The question is today the right time for actually saying it? And if you are going to say something, how are you going to say it? And perhaps that's what really matters. The moon is square Mercury. So with the moon square Mercury, that is a very communicative. It's a very communicative aspect, and you feel sure that people are going to listen, but maybe they're not going to listen. And if they do listen, they may not take kindly to your message. So what do? One approach is to fine-tune your message. Sagittarians, they can jump to conclusions. That's quite a Sagittarian thing. And it can be great jumping to conclusions. The advantage of jumping to conclusions is that you skip so many steps. You don't have to waste time thinking about things. People can spend hours, days, weeks, years thinking about things, trying to work it out, and they get nowhere. But that Sagittarian intuition is just immediately clear. And that's good, but just because you feel that you're 100% right doesn't mean that you should tell people what's on your mind, even if you are 100% right, because the situation just might not be right, and there is some fine-tuning to do. I really do think there is some fine-tuning to do, and I would suggest, Sagittarius, that you hold fire today. I don't think that today it should be particularly active for you. Not really. I really don't think it's that kind of day. I think there are things that you need to do, but I don't think you need to advertise the fact that you're doing them. And maybe with the moon in Capricorn, you should be paying some attention to material matters. Not everything is fine, but with the moon in Capricorn and the sun in Taurus, moon in Capricorn has a certain sympathy with sun in Taurus. There's a sense in which you can organize yourself, organize the material foundations of your life, make sure that things are in the right place, make sure that bills have been paid. Is that possible? I mean, maybe there's a couple of bills that haven't been paid or you've forgotten about them, and moon in Capricorn will allow you to sit back and see what you owe, and also what's owed to you. Though if you feel that someone owes you money, or indeed if you want to criticize someone, if you want to communicate with someone and tell them, you're doing this wrong, I go back to what I said at the beginning of this piece. It may not be the right time to make demands. Again, even if your demands are completely legitimate, it's just because the words just may not come out right. And you might cause a bit of anger, but at the same time, just nothing gets done. I should say something, though, about the conjunction between Mars and Neptune. Yes, there is a conjunction between Mars and Neptune today, and it's in Pisces. And from a Sagittarian perspective, that Mars-Neptune conjunction is in a low-profile sign, often connected with the home and the domestic environment. And so when there's Mars-Neptune conjunction in Pisces, that may indicate that perhaps some members of your family are confused about something, are considering a piece of action that might be ill-advised. Watch out for anyone doing repair jobs in your home. But unless they know what they're doing, unless they're qualified professionals. So if you see that something needs to be done in your home, or someone around you thinks something needs to be done in your home, and they just think it's just an easy job, I don't know, bang a few nails in, or especially if it's connected with water, be really careful. It's something as simple, I don't know, as changing a shower head, which seems simple, but is simple. But today, with Mars conjunct Neptune, anything connected with water is a recipe for difficulty. So be careful in the home, and don't be impulsive in the home in terms of trying to fix things, and don't allow other people to be impulsive. Make sure things are properly planned, and make sure you've got the expertise. And if you haven't got the expertise, get a professional in, or at least wait for another day or a couple of days, because this Mars conjunct Neptune can be connected with flooding, I'm not saying there's going to be a flood, but again, I have to give you the warning, just in case. And also, in general, dealing with your family, with this Mars conjunct Neptune, things could be more complicated than expected, and you shouldn't take what people say, take what family members say at face value, because they may actually say one thing but mean something else. Maybe they don't even know what they mean at all, because Mars is conjunct Neptune, and yes, it's in a part of your chart which is connected with the home and family. Capricorn. Moon is moving through your sign, right in the middle of your sign. So the moon is in Capricorn for everyone, all Capricorns, regardless of their time zone. And that means that I think you're feeling fairly confident. You feel that you understand the world around you. And I think that you benefit from the fact that the moon is in the same sign as Venus, because Venus goes into Taurus today, and it's also in the same sign as the sun. And so I think with the moon moving not just through Capricorn, but the fact that it's making a sextile aspect to Saturn. It's in the same sign as the sun. Venus is moving into Taurus. It's all very reassuring, and I think it's a day when you feel actually quite comfortable. I don't know whether you're looking at this screen or whether you're just listening to me, but if you look at a horoscope which is set for Capricorn, you will notice that all the planets are at the bottom of the chart, of a chart where you put Capricorn on the ascendant. Everything is at the bottom. It's been like that for some time, but when you've got everything at the bottom, that indicates security, stability. It's about being anchored, and I think Capricorn is a time when you can really be anchored, and you don't have to make much of an effort to tell the world what you're doing. You don't necessarily have to make an appearance. You don't have to be a big extrovert, and that's all a relief, and it's completely the right thing to be doing. So be comfortable, but also be creative. There are more and more planets going into Taurus. Jupiter's been in Taurus for a long time. Jupiter's been in Taurus for a year now, and Taurus is your fellow Earth sign. Uranus is in Taurus. The Sun is now in Taurus, and Venus is now moving into Taurus, and that build-up in Taurus is really allowing you to be yourself and to be creative in your own way without having to address the outside world. You can just do it however you want, and there's absolutely no need for explanation. In fact, the fewer explanations, the better. And if anyone asks you questions, you don't have to answer them. And I think there will be some questions today. Moon is making a square aspect to Mercury. The moon may be someone who maybe talks too much, is inquisitive, someone is curious about what you're doing. You don't have to tell them anything, really. But at the same time, don't be annoyed by anyone who is asking a lot of questions, who's talking too much. It's not a big deal. It's just words, and you can brush them off, because stability is what matters, and you can find real stability, and you don't have to spoil things by saying something you don't want to say. Okay, you might cause offence, you might be ignored, but you don't have to say it. And I think if you follow that principle, just always go in a direction of calmness, in a direction of stability. And if you do that, then it's going to be a really good day. And I do think that things are looking good for you at the moment. So yeah, take advantage of it all. Aquarius, you possibly feel that it's not the right time to be doing anything. And you may also feel a certain sense in which your ideas, which you put great store in your ideas, but your ideas may feel as if they're almost deserting you. And you might just be lacking inspiration. And you know what? You shouldn't worry about it. You cannot be full of ideas and inspired all the time. You need a space to relax every now and then. And in fact, Aquarius, you really mustn't force it. So if you don't have ideas, if there's no inspiration, just accept the situation. Because if you were to try extra hard to find excitement, then you might find yourself moving into undesirable areas. And perhaps that relates to the fact that there's a conjunction between Mars and Neptune today. That conjunction between Mars and Neptune should have nothing to do with you. It shouldn't be an issue. But if you try too hard, it could be an issue. I mean, it's like those videos on YouTube of people with poisonous snakes. I get them. I get all these videos of king cobras and people in the jungle finding these terribly poisonous snakes. You know, I myself, in Washington State, I never come across poisonous snakes. But I suppose if I walked around in the jungle, I would eventually find a poisonous snake. And I suppose it's the same with you. Left to your own devices, you're not going to find any poisonous snakes. But if you walk through the metaphorical jungle, in a snake-infested jungle, you will eventually find something. At some level, you may be looking for it. You're looking for danger. You're looking for excitement. And perhaps that Mars conjunct Neptune represents a poisonous snake. It's something that there's absolutely no reason for you to come across a poisonous snake. But I suppose anyone can just write to some mail order reptile delivery place and order a cobra, I suppose they could. Once that parcel is delivered, you've got a cobra to deal with. So that's a Mars-Neptune conjunction. Don't go looking for it. If you do go looking for it, yeah, you can find it, and it will certainly make your life more exciting. But I don't think that is the kind of excitement you need right now. And with this Mars-Neptune conjunction, it might, I suppose, have some impact on your working life, if you're working, or your business. Again, it's not something you should be seeking, but I suppose you could say that in extreme cases there may be a temptation to do something which isn't right, or perhaps someone at work suggests something and it's just not a good idea. You can ignore the suggestion. Or there may be, particularly if you have your own business or you're thinking about having your own business, there may be a temptation to spend money on something and it seems a really good idea, and there is the supposed promise that it can increase your income. Maybe even represent a whole new line of work for you. But it's Mars conjunct Neptune. It's dangerous. It's a poisonous snake, and you don't have anything to do with it. Maybe tomorrow, later in the week, you can consider it again, but right now, don't consider it, and just play safe, and that's all you need to do. Pisces, you are in quite a friendly mood. I think you were in a quite friendly mood yesterday. I think that Pisces, you are going to put a fairly high premium on friendship. Not so much relationships, but more friendships. I think you're going to enjoy being with people. Though the trouble is, I suppose, that when you bring people into your life, you can't entirely control what they're saying and what they want to talk about. And there may be times today when people talk about stuff that you don't really want to talk about. I mean, the one subject you really don't want to be involved with is money. I think money, it would be an irritation for you. I understand in a general sense that it's a time when money is important, when it's very important for Pisceans to make sure that their finances are in good order, and that they need to be very proactive in dealing with financial matters. I understand that. But it seems that today money is not something you want to talk about, but there are people who, it seems, do want to talk about money. And I think, okay, it's okay to have a short conversation about money if it's relevant, if it's topical, if it needs to be done. But as soon as a conversation goes on for too long about money and it's not very helpful, it's just going to make you irritated. So unless you're dealing with something which is immediately relevant, then I think that money as a conversation topic should perhaps be avoided. Still, I think that you do know how to express yourself in a way that is very reassuring, and you are helped by the fact that Venus is moving into Taurus. Venus in Taurus allows you to communicate in a way that is not abrasive, but actually puts people at their ease. You're going to know how to put people at their ease, and it's the sensitivity of your sign, Pisces. It's a water sign. You're going to be able to pick up on that, and at the same time, the moon is making a sextile aspect to Saturn. Remember, Saturn is moving through your sign. Currently it's around 1631 Pisces, and the moon is making a sextile to Saturn. So that's another way in which you can put people at their ease. That sextile means that you know how to behave in a social environment. You can just make everyone feel comfortable. But the only thing that perhaps I need to mention that may be a little difficult is the fact that Mars is making a conjunction to Neptune. And it's making that conjunction to Neptune in Pisces. And I think that this Mars-Neptune conjunction, it's difficult for everyone, I think in most cases. I mean, I know that there are certain good things to say about Mars conjunct Neptune. It can be quite spiritual. It can be transcendental, moving beyond the boundaries of our everyday existence. But with Mars conjunct Neptune in Pisces, maybe a certain tendency or a temptation to do something that is careless. Stability, you can stabilize everything around you. Things can be stable with Venus moving into Taurus. But that Mars-Neptune conjunction may just tempt you to do something, it seems harmless. But in fact, it's not harmless at all. Maybe you'll be doing it on the basis of someone making a suggestion. It's suggested that you do something. It seems like a good idea. You don't really know why you're doing it, but it doesn't seem as if it's going anywhere. But it could go somewhere. So I would suggest, Pisces, that you keep it simple, and if you have a sudden urge to do something that almost comes from nowhere, or perhaps it's someone's suggestion, if you have that sudden urge, then I would suggest that you resist that urge. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I am now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. And I ask the question, as usual, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was the army, number 7. I mean, that's just such a dramatic hexagram, isn't it? The army. I mean, asking the question, what is Monday going to be like? And you just get the army. I mean, that is a bit difficult to deal with on a Monday, isn't it? So what does that mean, the army? The army is about other people. It's perhaps about being with other people and being focused on a particular goal. There is just something that needs to be done, and there is an indication that we are in a strong position and that we can get good results. And this is especially the case if there is an opposing force. Now, in most cases, there's not going to be a literal opposing force. It could be about rivalry. It could be about something we're trying to tackle. And maybe that army relates just to our own resources. Maybe there's no one out there. I mean, what if you're watching this and you're completely alone? It could be just about your own resources, but it's how you're bringing these resources together. And I suppose this hexagram would be especially important if you're in a position of leadership, or if there are people working below you, then that could be more important. So the more people in your life there are, the more relevant this hexagram is going to be. But the army does suggest that there is an enemy, something you're trying to tackle, and you are trying to defeat the enemy. Maybe you've got a rival and you want to bring up some subject and tackle this rival. And the indication seems to be that you're going to be successful. Success is there. But the question is, how far do you go? I mean, the I Ching talks about this in quite extreme language. It suggests, you beat the enemy, but you don't want it to turn into a slaughter and kill everyone, which is, of course, not what's going on, is it? I mean, to talk about that language is extreme. But the idea is that we must do enough to safeguard the situation. We don't want to go further than that. And once we've achieved what we need to do, we mustn't, that's it. Because if we go further than we need to do, and I think that would be the symbolism of moving from winning a battle to some slaughtering the enemy army. You don't want to do that. You just want to win the battle. That is enough. It talks about taking prisoners, interrogating prisoners. Not about, that's as far as we should be going. And there is then an issue about delegation. Now, this is perhaps only going to be relevant if you're running a business, or I suppose it could be in the family when you're delegating responsibility. Who are you delegating responsibility to? That's important. There seems to be a choice. You can either delegate responsibility to someone who is older or more experienced, or you can delegate it to someone younger and less experienced. And there's a warning that if you delegate responsibility to the party with the least experience, that party is not going to be able to handle it, and they may go too far with the way they assert their power. And so if you find yourself in a position where you have to delegate responsibility, delegate it to the person with the most experience, the person who is most trustworthy. Don't delegate it to someone young, inexperienced. You might feel, you want to give them a go, see what happens. I wouldn't do that, and not today, not in the short term. But this hexagram, the army, it does move, and it moves to hexagram 29, which is the abysmal, which represents the pit, and it represents a danger, which kind of makes sense given what we've just supposedly won this battle, or we've been successful, but we've had to be very careful not to be too assertive, to follow through our advantage in a destructive way. So we get through that and we get to the abysmal, and the abysmal is just a dangerous situation, and it fits with the fact that there is Mars conjunct Neptune today. And that abysmal Mars conjunct Neptune, that is what Mars conjunct Neptune actually is. So it seems that the I Ching and the Mars conjunct Neptune are really fitting well together. And it is a dangerous situation, yes, but it's a dangerous situation that we understand, that we have been through before. And so if we use that understanding, and if we do what is natural without forcing things, we will be able to get round the problem. We'll be able to work with the danger, and we won't fall in the pits. We won't get up to our eyebrows in mud. We will be able to get through. But it is a dangerous situation where we just have to be natural and use our experience and not do anything crazy or unexpected, that's a danger with Mars conjunct Neptune, but I think we're going to be able to handle it. So just follow the natural flow, and I think today will be okay. So having finished with the I Ching, I'm now going to look at Venus in Taurus, and Venus does go into Taurus today. If you're in London, it goes in around lunchtime. If you're in the Americas, it happens early in the morning. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, okay, it doesn't happen until late tonight, but Venus does stay in Taurus until the end of May. I think it's May the 23rd. And so, there are always two ways of looking at the meaning of Venus in Taurus. So if you take a sort of a rational perspective, you say, well, Venus is in an earth sign. Venus is in a fixed earth sign. Venus is in its own sign because Venus rules Taurus. Therefore, we can say, in a very general sense, that it is good to have Venus in Taurus. Venus in Taurus allows us to be effective in relationships. We can be comforting, we can be reassuring, and because it's in a fixed sign, there is a certain stability there, that people with Venus in Taurus are perhaps going to be reliable. Maybe they're going to honor their promises. And Venus also relates to money. There can be a certain concern about money. Perhaps people with Venus in Taurus are going to be good at collecting money and making money, but they might also be good at spending money, because Venus in Taurus can be about luxury, the good things in life, the excesses, wanting beautiful things, wanting beautiful clothes, and being able to create beautiful clothes. But it could all be quite expensive, and there may be a certain sense of indulgence with Venus in Taurus. And Venus is a female planet, and therefore it's possible that Venus in Taurus may work differently depending on one's gender. So if a woman has Venus in Taurus, that's her Venus, that's who she is. She may have many of the attributes of Taurus. On the other hand, if a man has Venus in Taurus, you could say, well, it's a female planet, he might project it. That might be what he's looking for in the outside world, what he's looking for in the opposite sex. It might relate to what he's looking for in a marriage partner. And so it may not be entirely who he is. But if you want to know who he is, maybe you need to look at the male planets like the Sun or Mars. So that might be some thoughts about Venus in Taurus. It is very generic. And in reality, one would never judge someone just by their Venus in Taurus. That's what we have to do. I suppose when I first started learning astrology, I'd have these pile of books, and when I was doing a chart, I'd go to a book, I'd see what it said to Venus in Taurus, and then write it down, find another book, see what that says about Venus in Taurus, and that would be how I would try and work out what a chart means. But you have to look at the overall chart, and also, I suppose, a life history. So in practice, one doesn't really look at planets in isolation, just Venus in Taurus. One looks at all the other stuff. But what I'm trying to do here is just get a sense of what Venus in Taurus might mean in isolation. But still, we can look at individual charts and see how that Venus in Taurus actually might be working. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I suppose the most famous person who has Venus in Taurus would be, of course, Diana. Of course, I've talked about Diana ad nauseum. I don't want to spend too long talking about Diana. But she certainly had Venus in Taurus. And you could say that she very much embodied Venus in Taurus. She was a fashion icon. Venus is about fashion. It's about beauty. She was considered to be an attractive woman. She was a princess, and what she wore was important. And Venus in Taurus, it's a female planet. So you would not expect Diana to be projecting it. It's her. And so to understand Diana, you would maybe look more at, you wouldn't so much look at her sun in Cancer because sun in Cancer is a male planet. And I know you might say that in many cases she was a sun in Cancer, but from a theoretical perspective, you might look at the moon in Aquarius and Venus in Taurus. And Diana's moon in Aquarius, I think that she was quite individualistic, and she was quite forward-thinking and forward-behaving. For example, shaking hands with an HIV/AIDS patient and making it quite clear she didn't have without a glove, and that was a very Moon in Aquarius thing to do, really trend-setting and having a really big impact. But we're interested in the Venus in Taurus. And so, you could say Venus in Taurus was in its own sign. So you could say in some respects, she was fortunate. She came from a wealthy family and she married a prince. So that looked good. But that Venus didn't entirely work out. So you then have to look at other things about that Venus. And the other things about that Venus would be, well, that Venus is actually quite close to Algol. Algol is the fixed star, connected with decapitation, disaster, injury. It's the head of the demon. It's not exactly on the fixed star. I think it's about 1.5 degrees off. And Venus is square Uranus. So that Venus square Uranus may indicate instability instability regarding relationships, Venus square Uranus. So that is certainly a possibility. Venus is in the fifth house, and the fifth house represents children. Venus in Taurus, and it's therefore interesting that she had her first child on her Venus return, and this leads to someone else who has Venus in Taurus, and that is Prince William. And so as we move to Prince William, Diana's son, he has Venus in Taurus. His Venus in Taurus is therefore projectable, because in his chart, Venus in Taurus would represent the other, would perhaps relate to the women that he is attracted to, getting involved with. And also, his Venus is in a later degree than Diana's. His Venus is that much closer to Algol. And so Venus in Taurus conjunct Algol may indicate bad things happening to women. And I suppose Venus in Taurus, his mother was killed in a car accident, and at the moment his wife has got cancer at a very young age. And so we may be seeing his Venus in Taurus working in a way which is not as fortunate as it should be. And I suppose this reminds us that when we're looking at Venus in Taurus, we need to consider perhaps where in Taurus that Venus is. So if we see Venus at maybe 24, 25, 26 Taurus, though that degree area, we may be thinking, well, hold on, this Venus is conjunct Algol, and it might be in its own sign in Taurus, but it's also conjunct Algol, and it's possible that Algol is a real negative. Now, I don't really know much about Prince William as a person, and I don't know quite how that Venus in Taurus is working. It may have actually nothing to do with his personality. It may just be about perhaps the women he's attracting, what kind of women he's attracting. I suppose the basic role model would be his mother, which would be, of course, Princess Diana. And of course, she died in an accident. So that is William's Venus in Taurus. I should make a quick point about Harry's chart. Remember, Diana has had her Venus at 24 Taurus, and Prince Harry has his moon at 21 Taurus. So again, Prince Harry's moon in Taurus links with his mother's Venus in Taurus. So Princess Diana had her first child when Venus was conjunct her Venus, and she had her second child when the moon was conjunct her Venus. So that's Diana's Venus in Taurus. Now, Venus in Taurus is associated with beauty, and I suppose you could say that someone who has Venus in Taurus might be interested in sort of modelling and fashion. And I suppose one thinks about Melania Trump, who has her Venus at 28 Taurus. So, like Diana, this Venus is not going to be projected, is it? Because it's a female planet. And again, I don't know much about Melania, but she's into stuff, isn't she? She's into the things that money can buy, and fashion and clothes. It's all very important to her, and that is typical Venus in Taurus, isn't it? And like Diana, you could say that she's fortunate with that Venus in Taurus in its own sign. I mean, she came from immigrant from Slovenia. She married this man who is incredibly rich. She's got everything that money can buy. But still, of course, it's not perfect, is it? It's perhaps not what she quite had in mind. But I think in a broad sense that Venus in Taurus is working. But I've been thinking about Venus in Taurus, and I think that there may be something rather stubborn about Venus in Taurus. Stubborn, and a sense it's saying, this is the way I am. Take it or leave it. I think we got that to an extent with Diana. I mean, you could say, well, that was Diana's moon in Aquarius cutting in. But Diana did not conform to royal life. Not really. She didn't fit in. Just shows how difficult it is marrying into royalty, even though she came from a really high status family to begin with. But even then, it wasn't quite enough. And so, but she was still trying to show her independence, and that may be the fixity of Venus in Taurus. And I'm wondering if we kind of see the same thing with Melania. I kind of get this feeling of sort of attitude, and I don't know if you remember. You probably do remember. That I think she went to when her husband was president. She went to to visit the Mexican border, or was it a refugee center, and or for migrants where they were. Isn't that right? It happened when her husband was president. She was wearing his coat, and on this coat was written these words which said, "I really don't care, do you?" You was spelt not Y-O-U, but just a U. And that was a message. It was maybe reminded me a bit of that scene in The Exorcist when Reagan, remember those words, "help me," appeared on her, was it her face or her torso, that scene in The Exorcist. And maybe that scene in The Exorcist is a bit like with Melania, and that "I really don't care, do you?" It's like her message. And that I sort of feel with sort of echoes of Diana in a weird kind of way, that there is something willful about Venus in Taurus. And someone else who really didn't care was Sid Vicious. Remember him? He was in the Sex Pistols. He died of a heroin overdose, and he had Venus in Taurus. There is his Venus at 2640 Taurus. In fact, he had Venus conjunct Algol. So that's why it's important to look at where Venus is. So Diana had Venus fairly close to Algol, conjunct Algol. Prince William had Venus conjunct Algol. Now, the link, if there is a link between William and Sid Vicious. Now, with William, okay, his mother died in a car accident, and his wife has got cancer in her early 40s. Now, the woman that is most associated with Sid Vicious is Nancy Spungen. Now, Nancy Spungen was she was his girlfriend. We don't know, and in New York. And anyway, she died, and I'm not quite sure. Oh, I should know. How did Nancy Spungen die? But he was considered to be responsible for her death. So Nancy Spungen, was she shot, stabbed, heroin? God, I'm sorry about my ignorance here, but Nancy Spungen was this girlfriend, and I think that him and Sid Vicious, there was a story that they might have been in some kind of suicide pact. But anyway, she died, and so that might be Venus in Taurus not just Venus in Taurus, but Venus conjunct Algol in Taurus. That would represent Nancy Spungen. And of course, soon after Nancy Spungen died, he died as well of a heroin overdose. And I think in 1977, Sid Vicious said, he didn't think he was going to live. How old? He would have been around 20 in 1977. He said he didn't think he was going to live past 25. And so Sid Vicious is saying, this is it. This is my life. Like Melania, this is my way. I really don't care. Do you? Sid Vicious was like that. And of course, Sid Vicious is one of the songs he was most famous for is his rendition of My Way. I would try and find that on YouTube. And there are people that regard Sid Vicious's rendition of My Way as being better than Frank Sinatra's rendition of My Way, because it's more real, it's more raw, it's more gritty, and it's very hostile, but it is my way. And I'm thinking it goes back to Melania with that quote, I really don't care, do you? And maybe that's some aspect of Venus in Taurus. It is a fixed sign, it likes to do it its way. And of course, Sid Vicious was a singer, and I don't know. Of course, many people say he couldn't sing and whatever, but nonetheless, he was able to make a living as a singer. And My Way is very famous. I think it's the closing credits of the film Goodfellas used the Sid Vicious version of My Way. So maybe that's Venus in Taurus work starting to work there. Though we shouldn't forget with Venus in Taurus that it is quite sensual. It is about the physical. And a psychotherapist who is, he was a psychiatrist who had a hyper-Freudian approach to psychotherapy, I don't know, would he call it psychotherapy? I don't even think it's called psychotherapy, is Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich was a disciple of Freud, and he broke with Freud because I think that, as far as he was concerned, Freud was trying to sanitize what he was doing, and Reich was really into the sexual aspect of Freudian theory, and he wrote his famous book, Wilhelm Reich's The Function of the Orgasm was his big book. He also wrote another book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism, but it was a Freudian based theory that was really physical, really emphasized the sexuality of the thing, and there you see he has Wilhelm Reich has Venus in Taurus. That is really physical, and it is opposition Chiron. And I've looked at Wilhelm Reich's chart before, but I've seen this Venus. I do see this Venus opposition Chiron as being the maverick in action, because he was suggesting things about sex and relationships which were considered pretty outrageous at the time, although he had a lot of people who really swore by him. I mean, he took the view you could not be a psychotherapist unless you were a trained doctor. That was the way it used to be at the beginning of the 20th century. So people would train to be doctors just so they could be Reichian. Sorry, I should keep using the word psychotherapist. I should be saying psychoanalyst. That's the right word, psychoanalyst. Not so. If you wanted to be a psychoanalyst and a Reichian psychoanalyst, you had to be a trained doctor. So people would literally go and train to be doctors just because they wanted to be Reichian psychoanalysts. And he had Venus in Taurus opposition Chiron. Incidentally, Aleister Crowley, with all his stuff about sex magic, and who was actually not a Tauran, he was a Libran, but he had Venus opposition Chiron. Then I suppose we have to consider someone really nasty, And I suppose that brings us to Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler had Venus in Taurus. So let's find his chart. There's Adolf Hitler's chart. Venus in Taurus in the 7th house. So here we absolutely have to look at what is going on in the rest of the chart. And we have Venus is conjunct Mars in Taurus. So you could say that Venus in Taurus is fixed, but it seems to be really projectable. It's in the 7th house. It's obviously a female planet. It's being projected onto something else. And it almost seems as if with that Venus in Taurus, he is sending out that projection onto the German people. And but though it is said that with his Venus in Taurus, he was very charismatic. He had Libra rising. And Venus in Taurus, apparently people would be getting ready to confront Hitler. They'd be talking about his military strategy, and they'd be looking at how completely disastrous his military strategy was, and these generals knew what they were doing. They'd be getting ready to tell Hitler that he'd got it wrong. They'd go in there, and he would just charm them, and he would talk about something else, and they would leave the meeting, and they just realized the subject was never brought up. And clearly he had social skills. Munich 1938, Chamberlain completely fell through it. So he must have had certain social skills, and that might have been about his Venus in Taurus and being able to project something and people being able to pick up on it. And perhaps if you've got Venus in Taurus in the 7th, you can be all things to all people. You can be however you want to be seen. And that must have been part of his political success. Someone who was very successful as an actor was Charlie Chaplin, who was born 4 days before Adolf Hitler on April 16th, 1989. He, like Hitler, had Venus conjunct Mars and Venus in Taurus. So perhaps he was able to project that Venus onto his audience, and that may have been an important part of the way in which he was successful. So that's Charlie Chaplin and Hitler. Just remember, Charlie Chaplin was an Aries. Hitler was a Taurus. So I should probably be wrapping up now. Oh, well, Diana. I talked about Diana, and I suppose I should mention that woman who was born on the same day as Diana. A really nasty piece of work, but here she is, Victoria Nuland. Someone who was very responsible for a high degree of responsibility for what's going on in Ukraine, who really pushed America into getting involved in Ukraine, and was specifically involved in the Maidan revolt, where you had an elected president in Ukraine in 2014, and basically America contributed to the overthrowing of the government, and after that Ukraine essentially became an American vassal state, although sometimes the tail wags the dog here. But Victoria Nuland, there is her Venus at 24 Taurus. So remember, because she's born the same day as Princess Diana, July the 1st, 1961. So Venus is conjunct Algol. And Venus, Victoria Nuland, she's a woman. Venus is not a planet that's going to be projected. So that Venus is her. Venus is very stubborn, and she has a clear vision about the way she wants things to be, and she's got an obsession about Russia, an obsession which seems to go right back to her family and her ancestors who came from, who fled from Tsarist Russia. And so that Venus in Taurus is completely stubborn. This is the way I'm going to do it. And look at how Venus is square Uranus. She will not be told, and we don't know exactly what time she was born, but potential T-square there, Uranus opposition Moon with Venus on the T, but being very stubborn. And one of the images of Victoria Nuland is her in 2014 handing out, was it cookies to, that's why I think they called her the Cookie Monster, because she was handing out cookies to demonstrators in Kiev in 2014, really showing the active support. That's Venus in Taurus. The warm, protective mother, perhaps, feeding her troops, or rather feeding these demonstrators on was it the Maidan Square or wherever it was in Ukraine. And so that could be Venus in Taurus, and Sun in Cancer. That's Sun in Cancer, Venus in Taurus. That's Victoria Nuland in the Maidan Square. But I think that with Victoria Nuland, there is a certain Morrigan archetype going on there. Venus has a dark side, and I think with Victoria Nuland, we really do see the dark side with that Venus. And so I believe that the legend with Morrigan is that in the morning, Morrigan is the goddess. I think Morrigan was a Celtic goddess. She is with the warrior. She is the attractive seductress with the warrior, not in the morning, not in the morning, on the eve of a battle. She is with the warrior and she is seductive and attractive. That's one form of Morrigan. And then the next day, at the end of the battle, she is the raven, pecking at the body of the warrior who's been killed in the battle. And so you kind of see a little bit of an element of that with Victoria Nuland. And you see perhaps Venus at its darkest. You can see Venus supporting this revolt in 2014, but then she's around encouraging this war in Ukraine with, I don't know how many Ukrainians have been killed. Is it 500,000? I don't know. It's massive, and so she's perhaps almost in the mud of the Donbass, the raven picking at these bodies. So you could see that with that Venus, and I think that also that Venus is conjunct Algol. So I think we do have to be aware, at least with, well, we saw that with maybe with Hitler with Venus in Taurus, but with Victoria Nuland, Venus as a feminine planet, with Victoria Nuland as a woman, she is owning that Venus. It's her Venus, and I think we can see how that Venus perhaps is actually working. Anyone else with Venus in Taurus? I suppose another person involved in the State Department is the current Secretary of State, is Antony Blinken. Antony Blinken, don't know his time of birth, but Antony Blinken has got Venus in Taurus, opposition Neptune. Secretary of State, I suppose you could say Venus in Taurus is trying to get on with other people, get on with other countries. So you'd expect Venus in Taurus to be very good at being a Secretary of State. You know, I mean, Kissinger had Venus in Taurus. Antony Blinken, yeah, he's got Venus in Taurus. But how well is he working? How well is he functioning with Venus in Taurus? Venus in Taurus is a fixed sign. He has a clear idea about the way things should be, and it's opposition Neptune. And so in his case, maybe that Venus in Taurus is too fixed. And I suppose that may be a side to Venus in Taurus that we are not fully aware of. It is that fixed view of the way relationships should be and the way relationships with other countries should be. And Venus is opposition Neptune, and and as a Secretary of State, I think general consensus is Antony Blinken has been a bit of a disaster. Certainly if you look at how he's been handling China, he's been offending the Chinese. I think he's just gone to Beijing and it wasn't particularly successful. So he has not been a very successful Secretary of State. Sure, he's been very good at keeping things going with America's allies, but in terms of dealing with a complicated multipolar world, Antony Blinken has been a disaster as a Secretary of State. So there are limits to how well that Venus in Taurus has actually been working. I could go on, but I think I'm running out of time. So those are a few charts with Venus in Taurus. Obviously, they're charts that I find interesting. So there is certainly a bias there. But I hope you found that interesting, and I hope you enjoy Venus as it moves forward in Taurus. I think overall it should be good for us with Venus now in Taurus from now until May the 23rd. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed this video, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And yes, thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.